Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a really fantastic new series that I'm doing with my colleague, Soumen Chatterjee. I want to introduce myself. My name's Amantha King. I'm the founder of Amantha King Coaching here in the United Kingdom. I'd like to welcome and introduce my guest, Soumen Chatterjee. Hello, Soumen.
Hi, Amantha.
Hi, Soumen is the Executive Director and Partner of the Neuroleadership Institute in India and South Asia. And Soumen is someone I have been really keen to interview. We got to know each other during lockdown. We connected on LinkedIn, which is a fantastic platform for coaches, organizations, businesses. And I first spotted some of the posts that Soumen has been putting out about neuroscience, because neuroscience is really interesting. So Soumen, if I can ask you, firstly, welcome. Tell us a little bit about neuroscience and why neuroscience is emerging as a really hot topic and something that businesses, coaches, organizations are taking more of a serious look into. Tell us a bit about it.
Thank you, Amantha, for this opportunity, and namaste to the entire audiences here. It's a very interesting question that you asked me, because neuroscience is recently developed. It's just about a decade or older than whereas behavioral sciences has been there for much longer, psychology for that matter. The reason why neuroscience is actually getting better is because it actually goes a couple of layers below our behaviors. It actually starts looking at the way we think, because the way we think, so do we feel. And when we feel in a certain manner, we behave in a certain manner. So to change behaviors, habitual behaviors, if you can change the way we think, I think that's where it all starts from. So neuroscience actually is telling us today, and the research has actually sort of gone through the roof thanks to the advent of technology. As you know, we now know real time what happens in the brain, and that's the truth. This is not inferences. This is exactly what happens in our brain. So therefore, there's a lot of scientific evidences that are telling us as to what happens and what should we do about it. And I think that's the power of neuroscience.
So that's really interesting, and I'm a massive fan already, and use neuroscience a lot in my work. And it is something that organizations are now starting to realize, that actually if we want to improve our performance, if we want to change the direction and behaviors that people are maybe adopting or taking, it has real power behind it. So what would be, for those watching who maybe don't have a science background, what is neuroscience when we break it down?
Okay, so again, a very thoughtful question, Amantha. So at a very simple level, neuroscience is how our brain learns, acts, stores memory, takes decisions, perceives things, all of that. But essentially, as you know, the brain is just, if you just put your two fists together, that's the size of your brain. And I'm sure you could show the audience your model as well at some point in time. Yeah, and it's just 1.5 kgs in weight, and it looks a very insignificant looking organ. But there's a big difference between this one organ and any other organ in the body. All our other organs in the body work internally. Brain is the only organ which is socially connected. It's impacted by what's happening around us. No other organ in the body, your heart doesn't get impacted by, if some two people are fighting in front of you. Whereas your brain is the only organ which is socially connected, and therefore, so neuroscience tries to delve into this aspect, try and see how do we store memory. What happens when we get hurt? What happens if I feel excluded from somebody sends out an email, and by mistake inadvertently misses my name out in that mail, and I see the entire team walking in for another meeting which I'm not invited to. What happens in socially I feel excluded? So all of those are actually part of neuroscience study, and they're telling us hordes of stuff. In fact, to be honest with you, Amantha, the neuroscience is putting conventional wisdom on its head. For many years we believed that something is a fact which is not really so, and neuroscience is telling us that. And so that's why I believe it's an exciting field, and anyone and everyone should actually read a little bit about it.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's a universal concept, isn't it? We all have a brain. So actually it's something that really binds up every single one of us. And so that's why we were keen to do a series of short conversations between the two of us. And this is the first one that we're doing. And we're really excited about this, aren't we? Because we're going to actually talk today about habits. And it's probably a fairly timely episode because we know that January's come and gone. You know, how are people doing with those new habits or goals and or objectives that they've put in place? And we know that habits are really, they can either work for us or go against us, right, Soumen? So tell us, what is a habit?
Okay, very simply put, habit is, and I'm not getting into neuroscience yet.
Okay.
Habit is automatic recall of a memory. For example, when you go to brush your teeth in the morning, you're not trying to do some conscious, decision making. You're not trying to figure out which hand to hold the paste, the toothbrush, and how should I squeeze the paste. You're not thinking about those things. You're simply doing it automatically because your brain is able to recollect that deep memory of how to do it. It's coded in your brain. So, for example, when you're driving to work, you're not kind of thinking as to when should I, change the gears and when should I put the blinkers on, because it's happening automatically while you're actually thinking of many other things. So the brain actually tends to create habits to save on energy so that it can use its energy for better and more complex decision making or thinking processes. So that's where, that's what habits are. Habits are really things that are locked into your brain, but they come out at a stimulus and they just happen. So you rightly said, habits can be great, or it can actually put us in a pretty embarrassing situation because we are not really sure of what we do because it's a blind spot for us. Yeah. So that's what a habit really is, at its simplest form.
Yeah, and I think that's really helpful for people because actually, I think because it is so automated, we sometimes struggle to actually even identify the habits that we have because it can feel at times like it's outside of our awareness. And it's like you said, even then, when you just said about the toothbrush, part of me had to think, actually, which hand do I hold the toothbrush? And
Right.
so you're right, aren't you? Because the brain is processing, vast amounts of information every single second of the day. I mean, our head would probably melt, wouldn't it, if we tried to actually process every single one of those thoughts, patterns, processes. We just couldn't do it. So that is so interesting when you say that. And so how do they form? Because most people know what a good habit looks and feels like, but I think what we struggle with as humans is the consistency around either getting a good habit and keeping it going, or a habit that is maybe not serving us very well, and how do we tweak it, how do we shift it, how do we change it? So are you able to tell us anything about how habits actually do form?
Yes, of course, and I will in a moment I think introduce a little bit of neuroscience, which is really exciting here. Keep it very simple, but are you comfortable if I use a few slides to
Yes,
bring in a bit of an audio visual impact to this?
Absolutely, because I
great.
think we know what the outside of the brain can look like, but let's dive deep and see what it looks like on the inside. That's great.
So I'm just sharing my screen. I hope you can see it.
Yes, definitely.
Are you able to see it? Great.
Yes, absolutely.
So fundamentally, let's look at this. Let me introduce you to the actors in the brain. Okay, and please pardon the sketch of the brain. That's just for you to understand basic shape. Of course, it's a very complex organ. Now, let me. Sorry, I think Amantha will have to cut it down from here. Okay, I got in the wrong place. Okay, so I'll edit it out for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's answer this question. What triggers habits? Okay, this is the question that you asked me. So you can see that there's a inner part of the brain, okay, which loosely is called the limbic system, which has multiple parts. It's got the cingulate cortex, it's got the striatum, the basal ganglia, and a whole bunch of regions which is out in the brain. This central part of the brain is the striatum is actually activated when anything socially happens around us. It actually wakes up, literally wakes up when something happens around us, which is rewarding. The striatum is also a place which houses the pain and the pleasure centers of the brain. Okay, so that's one actor, very important actor here. The D stands for dorsal, so that's just technical. Then, of course, we all know about the prefrontal cortex, the little membrane, just if you put your hand on your forehead, and I have plenty of it. So if you just put your hand on the forehead, the thin membrane there is all of your thinking brain. I mean, so much for us being thinking human beings. It's the youngest member of the brain, which grew just a million years back. But the rest of the brain, actually 85 to 90% of the brain is actually non-thinking. It's all non-conscious. So the prefrontal cortex is where we do all our conscious thinking, decision making, all our processing that happens. That happens in the prefrontal cortex. Now, interestingly, all our awareness, when we say we are aware of something, when we are curious, when we want to explore something, when we get excited by looking at something, all of that intentional awareness is managed by the prefrontal cortex. But there's another kind of awareness, which many of us are not aware. It's called non-conscious awareness. And literally it means when you are not aware of what you are aware of.
Okay, I'm just going to have to think about that for a minute. So say that again. It's when you're not aware of. Say it again, please.
When you're not aware of things that you are aware of.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting? So and the brain is actually locked it in. It's non-conscious. You don't realize it, but you are aware of some things which have gone into the brain. Okay. So that's the striatum and the prefrontal cortex. Now let me introduce you to the Brad Pitt of the habit in the brain. Okay, this is the guy. This is the nucleus accumbens. Two spot-like things you can see in the actual brain scan on your right of the screen. You can see them as yellow dots. They are on both hemispheres of the brain. And this is the guy who's actually responsible. So every time you see something nice happening, every time you walk into a party and you get the smell and the sound of the party, the one guy who wakes up instantly is nucleus accumbens. Okay, it's responsible for any reward, any impulse. When you do things in an impulse, addiction, all your addictions start with the nucleus accumbens, and I'll tell you how it happens, and that's the most interesting part.
Okay. Now,
before I get to that, I'll also introduce you the fourth actor, which is called the tegmental area. Okay, these are sac-like things which are ensconced inside your spinal cord, and they house the neurotransmitter called dopamine, which we all know is the happy hormone, which makes us feel good. And it's pumped through the brain using two different paths. Okay, so for the purpose of this discussion, we're talking about the mesolimbic path, not the mesocortical path. Okay. And I'll explain to you how all this happens. But this is where it is housed, and this is the guy who makes us feel good. All right, now here comes the interesting part. Look at the distance between the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. It's very small. It's almost housed next to each other, which means every time the nucleus accumbens actually gets excited, the ventral tegmental area reaches very fast, and it almost seeds the nucleus accumbens area with dopamine. Okay, very close. The time taken is milliseconds. Okay, now here is how all these guys come to play together. Now imagine, you're going for your first tequila or a wine, or maybe you have you sleep late and you're trying to sort of do something different, but or you get habitually irritated in any of your things that actually become habits. Okay, now see what happens. And the first time when you do this, your brain, as I told you, is a social organ. It's scanning the situation around you. If you walk into this this party and someone offers you a glass of wine, you have never tasted wine before, and your nucleus accumbens gets, wow, this is something new, I must try this. And instantly what happens, the ventral tegmental area pumps in dopamine and you feel good. You take a sip, you feel good, you feel excited. Or let's say, you want to, you love to sleep. I mean, you wake up early, but one day your alarm goes late and you get up and you say, the bed looks very inviting. The nucleus accumbens says, wow, not bad. And it just pumps the brain through the mesolimbic pathway with dopamine. Now you're feeling happy about what you've done. Now, here is the fundamental trigger when actually habit starts forming. This is an event. This is not an habit. Now, have you heard the word lose control?
Yes.
The lose control is actually true in the brain. Now what happens is the prefrontal cortex, which is like the parent, the strict parent who says, hey, listen, Amantha, enough. You've had one too many. Don't reach out for the third. Okay. And it tries to control you. It tries to bring in your experiences and tries to make sure that it has a veto over what you're trying to do. Now, if you're good, then you will listen to your PFC. But often we don't listen to our PFC. And net result, the PFC says to hell with you. I've tried, sort of keeping you under control. I'm going to pass it on and let the non-conscious awareness take over. This is where habits start forming. Now the striatum has taken over and the PFC has gone cold. The nucleus accumbens has gone all excited. So next time you are actually, you go into a bed which looks inviting, you will feel like sleeping late. Or you walk into a party and miraculously the wine will appear in front of you.
Yes.
And you'll wonder why I didn't want to ask for wine. So this happens, because now it's non-conscious awareness. Your brain is now literally making you crave for it. You're not looking for it, but you're not conscious from your decision-making process because your decision-making is stopped, which is why habits can be good or bad because it can't distinguish, right? Now, this is also called the handoff. Now, what happens is because over time, as you keep doing this, what was created as a habit by the actors like the prefrontal cortex, the nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area, these guys switch off. They say, my job is done. I've got you hooked. Now my job is done. I've created the habit. Now it passes on to the dorsal striatum and the basal ganglia, which now code this. And it becomes a maintenance of the habit. This is how an habit actually forms. And and then of course with practice, as you keep doing it, as you keep reaching out or sleeping late or not exercising and or doing any of those things that you want to do but you don't do, the habit maintenance takes over. And even though it's not the right thing to do, but you have very little control over your actions. Does this make sense to you?
Yeah, massively makes sense to me. And it's why if I've understood this correctly, it's why the brain doesn't distinguish between a good habit and a bad habit. It just processes habits in exactly the same way through that dorsal striatum, because like you say, the logic has gone, I'm sorry, no longer my problem. So that is fascinating, Soumen. That is really fascinating. So you've explained that so brilliantly well and clearly. Thank you so much. Is there anything else for us to see or to add?
There's just nothing, but just to take on exactly what you just said, that the brain can't distinguish between a good habit and a bad habit. So when you reach out to your constantly when your phone pings, may not be a great habit when it comes to at the workplace, but the same habit can be very good if you were to search for your keys when you're leaving your house. So you kind of tap your pockets to see whether you have the keys in your pocket. So these are habitual things which are coded in the brain. You are doing this constantly, and we are unconscious about it. And so sometimes these things work well for us. Sometimes they can actually be very damaging, especially for people around us, because the people who notice your habits are people around us, not you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it sort of begs the next question, which is, can you ever break those habits? Can you ever reconnect that prefrontal cortex to go, do you know what, actually, I don't want to go to parties and crave wine, or I want a different feeling to be anchored. That's something we talk about in NLP. I want to anchor something different around when I see my bed. Is it ever possible to really do that, Soumen?
It is possible, very much possible. And it's been time and again tested, Amantha, especially in coaching. We use a lot of techniques, and I'll just share a few ideas and thoughts here, but absolutely possible, to change habits. So, The question therefore is, how do we change? What do we do here? And the first answer is really very simple. And I'm going back to the same model again. In the first place, habits formed because the control of the thinking shifted away to give it to the non-conscious awareness, and the non-conscious awareness took over. I mean, in so many words. And so the first answer is rather simple. If we could somehow bring that control back to the prefrontal cortex, I think we would have done 50% of the job. And how do you bring that back? How do you bring that back is following a simple. This is what coaches do. And I mean, I'm sure you're a coach yourself, and you know this. But we use 4 elements in a conversation. So for example, these 4 elements are awareness, impact, commitment, and reward. And I'll explain to you in a moment. For example, you could ask a question saying, as you're coaching people or having a conversation with someone, you notice a particular habitual behavior. So you can say, can I share an observation that I'm noticing? Or I sense a trend here, a pattern of behavior. Would you be keen to sort of, if I share that with you? Or you could even ask them to label the habit by saying, hey, clearly there's an habit here. What could be a good name for this habit? By making people label things, you're actually bringing in your prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain into action. Okay. Or you could even say that, if you could define this particular issue as a habit, what would it be? So some of these questions can actually bring awareness that, I actually have a habit. The second, and that's a big part, difficult part, because most of us believe we do. I mean, I can't see my habits. My audience can see them. So I'm sure they're making notes of what my not so good habits are. and that's the big difficult part. I don't even know that I have habits which need to be changed. So awareness is the first step. Next is impact. For example, you could ask questions like, what's the impact of this habit on your life? How is it impacting your career, your self-esteem, your relationships? Basically getting people to realize that sometimes these habits are actually impacting in not so good ways. Because unless I am getting it, unless I'm beginning to realize that there is an impact of this habit, I'm not going to make much effort to change it. Okay. I can even ask the person to measure things. For example, I can say, how often does this occur in a week? So for example, every time I see Amantha and I feel excited, I'm going to, go to the whiteboard and make one, mark there so that I can speak to her. Things like that. I mean, how can I put a measure to it? Now, commitment is the difficult part. Okay. Now in commitment, you could ask again questions like, how would your life be if you could change this habit? What could we do if you had to do something different? What would it be? And those are the kind of questions that bring people towards an action orientation into commitment. Finally, reward. Remember, if you have all read Charles Duhigg's famous book on habits, okay, The Power of Habits, you will know that habits start with a cue, and then of course, that cue, when you do that routine, you actually get a reward. So change the reward. Give a reward to yourself. So if I'm on a diet and I've really lost weight, then on so-and-so reaching so-and-so, I'm going to treat myself to an ice cream. Something like that. Anything which is rewarding. If I'm getting lazy to exercise, I'm going to stick a picture of my role model with his 6-pack abs, on my, washroom mirrors. And I'll look at that and say, wow, this is what I want to be, So all of that, just reward yourself. Now, questions itself may not be, that's a beginning of the discussion, but there are some other very interesting stuff you can do. Let me share this with you. We all know this as coaches, but for the others who are venturing into these kind of conversations, visualization and affirmation is very important. The brain can't distinguish between what is real and what is imaginary. That's why we can dream.
That's so true. I probably say that at least once every single day to my clients. I even was with someone yesterday talking about steps in a goal, and I said, listen, your brain just loves the opportunity to have a go. It doesn't really know that it's not real. So yeah, totally agree with that one. I love that one, Soumen.
Yes, absolutely. If you want to change your habits, just see yourself as the person with a different habit, and just, I mean, it might look stupidly simple, but that's what it is. The brain is a very funny organ, and it will actually make that thing happen. So so that's one. The other very interesting thing, which we in neuroscience or psychology we call it social persuasion. We use the word accountability here, but social persuasion. Because we are a social animal and the brains are socially attuned, we are persuaded by social behavior. So if I drew two lines and I said A was obviously longer than B, but I got a group of people to say B is longer, then even if you see A as longer than in length than B, because 10 people are saying that B is longer, I'll say I think B is longer. It's called social persuasion, and we use this in neuroscience in many ways. But using that same concept, if you commit to people, openly commit. So commit to your coach, commit to your buddy, commit to your partner, saying that that I'm going to do this. Then you brought in a bit of a social accountability on yourself, and that's another way of changing habits. So I'm going to give up smoking. I did smoke at one point in time in my life. My daughter was born, and my wife said, "No more smoking."
Okay.
And I said, this is not possible. But I promised to my daughter, my little baby, and I said that, what, I'm going to give up smoking. And I did. So social accountability is a very powerful way.
Yeah.
Last but not the least, I'll share with you, this is of course, this is Neuroleadership Institute's very famous if-then plan. Okay, linking actions to a cue in the brain. So again, looks exceedingly simple, but just try it. I'm encouraging everyone in the audience to try it.
Okay.
If I notice certain behavior, then I will act differently. See, if I notice that I'm getting agitated, I will drink a glass of water. If I feel that I'm not able to get up from bed, then I'll look at the picture of my role model and say, hey, you know what, I've got to go get to the gym. Now, what happens in the brain is that you have to write this down. You have to write it down and stick it up so that you can actually see it. Your brain will recall, just like visualization. It will believe that if this happens, and it will automatically trigger. After some time, you'll find that when you wake up, you don't need to see the picture anymore, or you don't need to, drink the glass of water because it's now become habitual. So these are some other things apart from the powerful questions that you can ask people to, where you ask them to get aware, then see the impact, then make a commitment and build a reward. So some of these, I think are very powerful ways you can actually build new habits and powerful habits.
Absolutely. And so can you answer something for me, which is that
Sure.
I do take exception, and I did take exception to a very big global organization who was purporting that actually it just takes 66 days to make a new habit, or 66 days to break a habit. I disagree. Now, the reason I disagree is that the reality is, I think if the motivation is high enough, you can, there is evidence to suggest you can bust it in as little as 12 days or 256. It can depend. So what are your thoughts around how long does it take to make a habit, and equally, how long does it take to break a habit, Soumen?
So, Amantha, you've asked me a neuroscience question, which I must applaud for it, because not too many people really get that deep. Here is something very interesting. What the science says is that ultimately, as I told you in the beginning of this conversation, that habits are automatic recalls, right? Which is also known loosely as hardwiring in the brain. Now, for that hardwiring process to happen, when the brain is constantly shifting its thought process through a particular neural path, which is different, usually that hardwiring, the physical hardwiring, the brain, those axons and actually become thicker because of neuroplasticity. they actually take about 66 days. That's a scientific an answer to this. But to your point, habits are also formed because of, and deep memories are also formed because of emotions. Now, I'm going to test this out with you, okay?
Okay.
Please think of, just close your eyes for a moment, or just in your inner mind, just think about the day your child was born, okay, many years back. And can you see the color of the curtains, the nurse probably sitting next to you, standing next to you, your partner? Can you see the baby's face?
Vividly,
right?
Vividly.
And how many years was that, if I may ask?
Nearly 16.
16 years back, and you can remember it vividly, right?
Absolutely.
Now, can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
Do you know what you ate for lunch a week back, same day?
No, I have no idea.
A little difficult, right?
Yeah.
And see, what happened is the emotional arousal was so high when you saw your first child being born. It's so high, and it can be also, it's not necessarily always high. It can be low. Death of a loved one, for example.
Yeah.
Any of these, they actually trigger. That memory is not stored in scatter, but it's gone inside a place in the brain called the hippocampus, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Yes.
The hippocampus is where all your deep memory is stored, and the hippocampus and this basal ganglia, which we mentioned, are attached to each other. So what happens is, for you to get into habitual, behavior, it's important that there's also emotional attachment to it. So people, people don't diet for days, but if they're sitting for a pageant, they're competing in a pageant, they're suddenly going to diets they've never done in their lives, because there's an emotional connection with it. Because now they can imagine, they can recollect, somebody in the family who won a pageant or a beauty contest or whatever, and that's why it can take sometimes shorter, sometimes much longer. If you're emotionally dissociated with your habit, it'll take you much longer.
That makes
but 66 days is the scientific.
Yes, exactly. And I think that is so true, which is why, so when I am working with clients and organizations and talking about the habits, it's about actually attaching those positive associations and those affirmations and visualizations that you talked about. And that's so powerful, Soumen, because the reality is, I read somewhere that it said, actually, if you want to shift a few pounds, what you don't want to do is summon up a visualization of losing something. Apparently the brain doesn't like the concept of losing something. That's not powerful enough. But actually gaining that new dress that you wanted to wear to someone's wedding, or seeing yourself on a beach looking glamorous and gorgeous and all of those sorts of things, and feeling really good about yourself internally. So that is so powerful, what you said. So I'm glad I challenged that, actually, because I think the reality is it's not as easy as saying 66 days and you'll be done. There has to be that emotional engagement and that preparation. I think that's the thing as well I just wanted to explore with you. I've absolutely loved the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, because in some way that talks about actually habit stacking. Is that something we can just cover a little bit for people? Because sometimes the thought of having to create a new habit can be so dreary and all-consuming. People just go, I'm not doing it. How can we use that concept of habit stacking? And can you tell us what's happening at a neuroscientific level? You sort of alluded to it a little bit.
So habit stacking is, if you were to put it very simply, it's like creating smaller goals. Okay, instead of trying to reach and suddenly doing something which is extraordinarily difficult for someone, doing something smaller, intermittent, so that you can actually feel good about what you're able to do. So you stack your habits. So you don't try to change it all, or you don't try to change it at length, but you just sort of look at one at a time. That's a very, very simple definition for people who are listening to this video.
I can give you an example where I did actually use the principle with my daughter. So I sort of described it to her as, look, if you've already got a habit in place that's serving you well, we're just going to attach another habit on top of it around the same sort of time. And coming back to that whole reward thing that you talked about. Now, she's an amazing piano player, and in the days when we were driving to school early in the morning, she's a teenager, so maybe not as aware of the clock, but I wanted to cultivate that habit of being timely and punctual. So I noticed that she always came down to play the piano, but often it was quite hurried because we'd have to leave. So what we actually talked about was actually making the reward of timekeeping playing the piano, and really enjoying playing the piano for 10 minutes. And so we then attached this thing of timekeeping to it. And she was consistently on time. Consistently.
Yeah, because you're also, I mean, it's a fantastic example. So one, you're not trying to make her change her habit. You are trying to just attach another small ladder, rung to the ladder. Okay, and the second thing is you've also brought in the emotional connect with it. There's a reward at the end of the day. Okay, and my take on this is that you're basically, to change an habit, you've got to change the cue. And what you've done in the example that you just explained, Amantha, is that you've changed the cue. It's no more looking at the clock. The cue is now the music that I'm going to finish by a certain time. So I've changed my cue, and this is absolutely very powerful. And yeah, I think all of these concepts work. Fundamentally, the brain is absolutely an amazing organ. It is neuroplastic. The part of the brain you use most will grow and will serve you well. So, in fact, that's why I believe that, as you age, you should use your brain more and more often, so that you can, use your calculators instead of, don't use your calculators, sorry. Try and do calculations, manually, because even though they might sound like a stupid thing to do, but let me tell you, we are losing our brain power because we are leaving everything to artificial intelligence, and soon we will be told what to do. That's
really good advice, Soumen. So I think we've covered the key things. We've covered the key things, which are, what is a habit? How do they form? How can we shift those habits by reconnecting that prefrontal cortex, and getting that emotional attachment to those new habits, those more productive ways of being. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we sort of bring our conversation, which has been absolutely fascinating? Thank you so much. I think this is going to land so well with people, and they're going to just want to know more. So I'm so glad we're doing this. But is there anything else that you want to add before we finish, in terms of habits, how we approach them? Over to you, Soumen.
Amantha, first of all, thank you very much. I think I enjoyed the conversation as much as you did, and this was really wonderful. Just a couple of thoughts I want to leave behind for our audiences, that if you are struggling with habits, something which you really want to get out of, there's nothing better than getting a coach. Go find a buddy. You don't have to necessarily go for a professional coach, but if somebody's certified or is a practitioner, then obviously it's easier. But go find someone who can actually guide you into some of these processes, because that works. That's important. See, we do this with everything. If you want to learn music, you go to a music teacher. You want to learn how to play basketball, you go get a coach. But when we want to change habits, we try to do it ourselves, and often it doesn't work, at least in the initial phases. So that's one thought I want to leave everyone with. And of course, neuroscience is so exciting. It's like climbing the Mount Everest. We are currently at base camp 1, and as you go deeper and deeper. And I've been at it for the last 4.5 years now, and there's no end to it. So I look forward to having more conversations like this with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I know that people are going to love this, and they're going to want to know more. So we will definitely be doing more of these. So for now, Soumen Chatterjee, thank you so much for giving your time. We've learned an awful lot from you today, and that will inform and help us, and we can understand and maybe challenge some of those habits maybe that aren't serving us so well. So thank you so much for your insight and your time today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.